Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with George Ortega and Jamie Soden. And just before we started recording this podcast, we were talking about, animals and veganism and, different documentaries and such. And because in the past four episodes of the Free Will, Science, and Religion podcast, we were talking about the belief in God and the attributes of God and all sorts of things like that. But in this one, we're going to kind of tie it into the belief about other animals, non-human animals, and how might the belief in God or lack thereof affect our views of how equal we are with other animals or not. George, do you have thoughts on this?
Well, relative to religion, what I'm aware of that in the maybe Judeo-Christian religion, certainly in Judaism, there's a prohibition against cruelty to animals. You're not allowed to be cruel to other animals. And then, like there's in Judaism, you're not allowed to eat pigs because who knows? Maybe they understood that pigs are more intelligent than dogs, and why would anyone want to eat a dog? And then, of course, with the Hindu religion, they won't eat cows. So that's pretty much as I'm aware of in terms of our traditional religions and the treatment of animals.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Now, see, from my perspective, the way I grew up is, well, I grew up in a very fundamentalist Christian type Protestant culture, and everybody, ate meat. I mean, I never met a vegetarian or vegan until, my mid 20s. Um, and basically, here's what where it all began is that because of how I got into the abortion issue, and then people are asking, well, why is human life worth protecting when we slaughter and eat these other animals all the time? And they had a good point. And so I thought, well, why would human life be any more valuable than anything else? And I came to the conclusion, well, I couldn't come with a valid reason, but the Christians, there are many Christians, they say, well, human life is more valuable because humans are made in the image of God, but the other animals aren't. And then, of course, my question is, well, then whose image are the other animals made in?
That's a great point. And why would it matter that we are made in God's image and the other animals? And it's like as if they totally discount the fact that other animals feel pleasure and pain.
Exactly. That's what we have in common with those other animals. And that's the whole issue of why I wouldn't want to do something to some other animal that I wouldn't want done to me. And so, yeah, this is an interesting thought. And yeah, really, why would it matter whether some particular species of animal is made in the image of God? And you have to go even deeper as to what does that mean, because now, George, I know, and everybody else knows who's been listening to this podcast by now, that you have a more pantheistic view. God is the universe, sort of a thing. So, by that definition, that would mean we're all made in the image of God, then, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, and even beyond that, when anything gets hurt, it's actually the universe or God hurting itself, and why that should happen, is beyond me.
Yeah, that seems like a very masochistic God.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, that's hard to understand. But I know that as far as the Christians that I know, they say, well, humans are made in the image of God, but the other animals aren't, which implies to me that God is of a human species, the God that they believe in. That I mean, that's all I know how to derive from that. What do you think?
I don't know, Jamie. What's your take?
Can you repeat what's been said, please?
Yeah, you know how Christians will say that humans are made in the image of God, and that makes them more valuable than other animals, but doesn't that imply that God is a human?
Um, in some sense, yes, but also, um, shows what a bias their god has towards other creatures who are also sentient, and um, it makes me, it does make you think, doesn't it? Why doesn't he have the same compassion towards animals as he does to humans?
Yeah. See, here's what's interesting about it is it doesn't seem to make sense it's like because Christians and I think Jews and Muslims do view God as a kind of a person that has some mind, but that means that this God kind of has to be racist or speciesist, because to favor humans over other animals, or to favor men over women, which is another common thing, or to favor, like, say, the Jews over the Gentiles. That was another thing that struck me particularly weird about the Old Testament. This idea that the Jews were God's chosen people, and the other people are like, oh, they don't matter.
But beyond that, I mean, like the God of, the Bible, of the Hindu God and all, basically these religions believe in this hell. Even Egyptian religion before that or whatever, they believe that, that some of us are going to suffer eternally for our sins in this. Like, I mean, that's insane. 'Cause, like, to believe that, that God is, like, for example, as they believe, all good, and that God would condemn not just animals to this suffering here, but human beings to a suffering far worse probably than any animal suffers on this planet. I mean, it just makes no sense.
Yeah, I mean that this seems weird. And of course, this whole all good thing is kind of a strange thing because we like the reason we call something good or bad is because of pleasure and pain. That seems to be where it comes from. And here's an interesting thing, George, because for example, the only reason that somebody would fear hell is because it would be painful, right?
Absolutely.
So what we're seeing is the hedonic imperative at play. People, they want to seek pleasure and they want to avoid pain. Therefore, when they're told by their religion that they have to believe a certain way, live a certain way in order to make sure they get the right afterlife, it's a powerful motivator, you know?
Oh, absolutely. And you got to think of like their mindset back then. They didn't have the science, they didn't have the technology and all. They, how were they supposed to know, like, what was real, what wasn't real? You know, I mean, like, you grow up in a tradition like that, let's say, and you're probably brainwashed by the time you're 4 or 5 years old to believe whatever, the elders believe in all. So it's kind of understandable that they would, develop these very, what we would consider now such strange beliefs.
Yeah, and here's what's interesting about it, George, is this idea, the idea that you are rewarded or punished in an afterlife based on what you do in this life, that actually does have a practical matter. It does have a practical effect on behavior, which would help reduce people from hurting each other in this life because they would fear being punished in the next life. So I think that would work. And I think that Hindus and Buddhists and Jains have like this belief in karma, like that something will come back to them. If they do something bad, then something bad will happen to them. If they do good, good will happen to them. Um,
Yeah, and Chandler, it makes complete sense. I mean, back then they didn't have legal systems, they didn't have like police enforcement and all this kind of like this criminal justice system we had. They had to try to they were, it was probably well intentioned. They say, well, if we, invent these really horrible things that, then people will behave better. Unfortunately it didn't work, but it was their incentive was proper, it made sense, yeah.
Yeah, well, what's interesting about it, George, is that in some cases it works and in some cases it doesn't work. I mean, if somebody tells you that you're going to go to hell for farting, that's still not going to stop you from farting, you know? But to a large extent, the fear of hell, the fear of punishment by some god, it worked in a similar way as a deterrent, just as certain laws that certain countries have might serve as a deterrence. Like somebody, they might not care about other people. They may lack empathy, but they don't want to steal somebody's car or they don't want to murder somebody because they're afraid of getting caught and being put in jail. So to a certain extent, I think sometimes it works. I ideally wish that nobody ever had to use a threat, some kind of fear threat as deterrence, because I wish everybody was just nice and we all had a happiness pill or something, you know.
Yeah, well, that's where, Mitch proposes this idea of a world without punishment. And I think that is where we're going. Because, like, for example, for most of us, we don't go out and, kill people and just commit crimes because we're afraid of the law. We don't do these things because we know they're wrong. We have this.
Exactly.
Yeah, so like I'm pretty sure within 100 years, 150 years, the world will be like that. Absolutely.
Yeah, because that's the deal is there are a lot of people like us that the reason that we don't torture, the reason we don't kill and steal is because we wouldn't want it done to us, and we know it causes pain, and that's all we need. So, I think that I mean, I don't know. Do you think it's possible for society to evolve to such a point where the majority of people were such that way that crime was extremely rare?
I do believe it, and I'll tell you how and why. Um, Basically, most, if not all, people commit crimes in an attempt to seek pleasure, to seek happiness. People like steal to have more. People, well, hurt people actually sometimes because of this nonsensical free will belief that we can overcome it all. But basically, it's like they feel good. That's what prompts them to do a lot of crimes. And here's the thing. So like imagine, in a lab, like we've got amazing antidepressants, we have amazing ADHD drugs, all these anxiety medication, all this stuff. They work amazingly. Imagine some lab, creates a pill, minimal side effects, no side effects, whatever, and you take one in the morning and you feel like great throughout the day. You take one the next day, so people live their lives like with this agent, kind of like a vitamin. They maybe they discover that, wow, our brain's lacking it, so like we provide it or whatever. In that kind of world, what incentive would anyone have to not just commit crimes, but really to do things that are morally wrong, that even aren't criminal?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like happier people would have less reason to do crime. Because you're right. In some way, they have to be seeking pleasure to do anything they do, and that implies that they're not getting enough pleasure in their life.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's why I'm excited. California is going to vote on legal marijuana in 2016, and it's already passed in like four states and DC and all. I mean that. I think cannabis has some side effects. It has you can't it's like with alcohol, you can't overdo it because then it becomes harmful and all. But again, like if people are experience that in huge numbers and feel better because like basically with what's interesting about cannabis is they refer to it as a hallucinogenic, and sure that's right, but you actually have to consume a whole lot of that for someone to like see things and hear things that aren't there. That's like it's much more accurately defined as a euphoric in that it just makes you feel good. So, so yeah, I think our society's evolving in that direction, and who knows how long it'll take, but hopefully it'll lead to the pharmaceuticals just creating something much more safe and powerful.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I mean, I'd like to think that such a thing happens. Whatever it takes, whether that or whatever else there is that people can find pleasure in. And see, now in my life, I mean, a lot of it was, I mean, I was severely depressed, like I've told you before, but that was because, I believed I was going to hell, and all sorts of stuff. I was stuck in that belief that I deserved to go to hell, and all this weird stuff because I doubted my Christian upbringing and stuff. So I thought I was going to be punished and stuff. So there was a lot less depression, and I was a much happier person in general since overcoming that. And I think that, as people overcome the belief in free will, that the blame that removes from people is going to make them happier in general, which is, why we explain that to people on our podcast.
Oh yeah, I mean it. I mean, think about it. Let's say in a few generations, I would guess that everybody's going to get this. I can't imagine it taking more than 10 or 20 more years for everyone to get it. Maybe another 10 or 20 to really, to bring it into the institutions of the world. To to teach it in schools, to have religions founded on it. And when that happens, nobody's going to have any logical, rational reason for blaming anyone else, meaning nobody's going to have any logical, rational reason for to want like vengeance against someone or revenge or to hurt other people, for the reasons we do today. And the same applies to ourselves. It'll be so much of a, I mean, it's such a powerful change in the world. It just boggles my mind that actually the scientists, philosophers still don't really get how powerful a change overcoming free will would create in the world.
Yeah, and here's a question. If we have a happier world with all these happier people, don't you think that would result in more vegans? Do you think there would be less animal killing and less cruelty?
Absolutely, because why are people cruel? They're cruel because they're hurting. They're because because the free will belief also just maintains this society where people are blaming each other and hurting each other. So like you eliminate that, then people feel much better, and yeah, that'll reflect itself in people just not being cruel to animals and absolutely.
Yeah, I think so. And I guess that's how, how can we get people to be happier in general? Because we know that that automatically will demotivate them from causing pain to others.
Yeah, actually, it just may happen. I mean, it's unfortunate that we're going through this climate change that, it seems pretty much fated to get worse over these next decades. I mean, who knows? We may get lucky and develop some technology that we can't even dream of now that'll solve the problem. But, if that doesn't happen, then I think our world may have to do with less. And one of the problems with like our having so much more than we need, or so many of us having so much more than we need, is that distracts us from what life is really about. I mean, a lot of poor people throughout the world they're happier than a lot of people in rich countries because they don't have all those distractions. They're spending time with each other and they're focused on the happiness that life provides.
Yeah,
So
and it's an interesting thought because you'll notice that people are constantly, seeking entertainment from something, and they can't wait till the next football or baseball game to watch because that's where all their entertainment comes from.
yeah, and that I think that's been around for like a couple hundred years. I don't know how long, but like that probably started with novels, with fiction. These like people began to read books, and it was really promoted. To get educated and read the classics and stuff. So now, like yeah, a lot of people go through life living vicarious existences. They're living their lives through other people. I mean, there's nothing horribly wrong with that, but I would think it would make more sense to just live one's own life instead of like a simulated life.
Well, yeah, I've always been more of interested in doing something myself. Like I'd rather play chess than just watch somebody else play chess.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and so here's another obstacle we face, George. Since we're kind of in recent episodes we've been on the God topic. How since we're trying to get people to be happy, how can you explain like how could a belief in God or lack thereof make somebody happier or sadder? Like how would it affect them?
Oh, that's a good question. All right, it's kind of like a double-edged sword in a way because like on the one hand, religions say, "Oh, God is like so loving. He's so good. He loves you. God loves you." So you have this like creator and sustainer of the universe that really cares about you. And that and then he's prepared this place for you like for you to be blissed out after you die and stuff. So people get that message. On the other hand, they get the message that, but if you don't believe this and that, if you don't do this, then there's this other place where you're gonna like suffer eternally. And not just that, that like God, like if you do certain things like that, God is portrayed as a very judgmental, severe, punisher also. So I have a feeling, that while the loving God makes people feel good, I have a feeling like with you, a lot of people are anxious because of this other side of God that religion promotes.
Right. See, how I heard it was God loves you unconditionally as long as you meet this big list of conditions.
Yeah, right, right.
Yeah. And so I find that it's sort of like, well, kind of like free will belief has a tendency that, well, some people they get a good feeling out of being in control of their life. They feel like they're in control of their life because they're ignorant of the causes that make them do what they do. But that feeling can be good. They feel like I'm in control of my destiny. Now they're completely deluded, but it might make them feel happy. But then there's the other side of it, George, and that's why we're against, the belief in free will, is because of the fact that it has such a big negative impact. All the blame and revenge that's caused by this, the idea that people deserve to suffer pain, an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth sort of mentality that results from free will belief. And so I find that, yes, sure, there's a happy feeling that some people get by believing in free will, but for every happy person there is who believes in free will, there's going to be, 20 unhappy people because of what the free will belief does to them.
And I think even more than that, I think even the people who are happy because they, believe that things are up to them, I think they're clueless in terms of how that belief just like limits their happiness, how they would be so much happier without it. Yeah, it's kind of like, like free will belief. It's kind of like, being addicted to a very, harmful drug like heroin or something. Yeah, it might make you feel great, but the downside is so much worse. I mean, like people need to, And again, I don't understand how psychologists, especially who deal so much more with positive emotions and happiness and stuff than philosophers, I don't get how it still hasn't dawned on them how harmful this belief in free will is.
Yeah, and it's weird because there's no basis for free will. There's no basis for this idea of free choice anywhere in science, and it's incompatible with religion as well. You know, which is interesting because we call this the Free Will Science and Religion podcast, and the way I look at it is that um, you basically from a scientific perspective you would have to be the complete author of your genetics and your environment. You'd have to choose who your parents are, where you're born, what they teach you. So you have to exist before you exist, and you have to choose the very state of your existence. So I mean, we know that's impossible, but then religion comes up with this extra thing that everything is caused by God, and God knows the whole future, and the future's set, which creates an even additional barrier that is against free will belief. So you have to wonder, like it's weird enough. Like I find it weird when there's just secular atheists who believe in free will because I find that weird. But I find it even more strange that religious people who believe in a God that knows what will happen in the future, but they still think that they are free to choose whatever they want, including free to choose against what God wants or whatever.
Yeah, I think, I growing up, I think like I think maybe it began to dawn on me how unintelligent, so many people are when I began to research happiness, because I think this was like initially back in the mid '80s, but then in the early 2000s, and like what just dawned on me was like this is like simple. This is like a no brainer. I mean, happiness is so easy, yet like it's not taught in schools. People don't really talk about it and stuff. And that was the first clue. But now with they're not getting this free will thing, and much more importantly, in a certain sense, they're not getting the importance of climate change, how serious it is a threat to our civilization and all. They're choosing to like either not think about it or just like believe people who just make them feel good, but have no idea what the science is about. It's unfortunate. And again, like I keep on it when I remind myself of that. I also have to remind myself that wait a minute, like it's not up to us. It's not up to us how intelligent we are, how much we get and all. So then that just always brings it back to like why is the world, why is whatever created us, why did whatever created us make us so unintelligent in so many ways that are harmful.
Well, what's interesting about it, George, is I think the hedonic imperative has a tendency to create stupid people. This is kind of an idea, but I think it'll make sense to you. Basically, since believing that bad things are happening, believing that bad things are happening has a tendency to make people less happy when once they face that. Then they have a tendency to go into severe, deep denial about climate change or the animal cruelty. They don't want to face those things because then they think, oh no, this is bad, and then their delusion of that this world is all pretty and sunshine and rainbows, it gets shattered, and then they get depressed, and so then because of that they avoid thinking about it, and they get mad at those who bring it up.
Well, no, I think you're absolutely right. There's an expression, the people are like look through the world through rose-colored glasses, and like, they're Pollyannish. They're just seeing the good and refusing to see the problems. Yeah, I mean, like look at like just even without climate change. I mean, like you've got like about 2 billion people on our planet that don't have like enough to eat, that a lot of them don't have access to safe drinking water. Their plight is really difficult, yet we refuse to look at it. So yeah, you're right. It's the hedonic. I mean, it's because we're seeking pleasure, but it's not just that. It's that like we're not good at happiness. If we were much better at happiness, yeah, we could then afford to look at the problems in our lives and in our world and take the time to address them, and face them. But I think it's just the fact that, that people are only just marginally happy. So many of them that, they just like the thought of just enduring more suffering. They can't deal with it. Yeah.
Yeah, this is important because people aren't very good at happiness. They don't know how to be happy, except that they figured out that, like, for a lot of them, they find that drinking alcohol makes them temporarily happy, which it probably explains why they keep doing that, you know. And the same is true with any sort of drug or activity, because I guess any pleasurable activity, including people having sex, makes them happy while they're doing it, which then that means that their happiness depends on their ability to do a certain activity. And that can be problematic when they can no longer do that certain activity that brings them their happiness.
Yeah, I mean, there's some kind of like pleasures in life that maybe we can safely enjoy, like eating with others or something, because we have to eat anyhow to survive. So maybe good food or something, or just being around people, makes people happy, and that's kind of an activity that like yeah, sure, you might develop a dependency on it, but like fortunately for a lot of people that they live with others and they have other people in their life, but yeah, I mean, again, that you're right. I mean, ideally, we would learn how to and cultivate the skill of being happy simply because it feels good, for no other reason. and then just like enjoy these other things without developing a dependency on them.
Yeah, like, we in one of our impersonal opinion episodes, you talked about the idea that you could focus on the feeling of happiness and access it directly somehow.
Oh yeah. As a matter of fact, I've been like over the last, here's my technique now. And I've used it in the past, but I don't know why I stopped using it, but I'm using it now again. It's basically I record an audio file. I've got several, but one of them says I'm saying to myself, I feel completely happy. Okay, so I might record it for 5 minutes, right? Then I'll loop it several times. So basically, I create a 3 hour file, audio file. Then I put it into my MP3 player. And when I'm walking through town, sometimes when I'm doing chores here in my apartment, doing the dishes, folding laundry, I will listen to that, file of me saying to myself, I feel completely happy. And the other thing that I'll do while I'm doing that is just very, subtly smile, have a pleasant facial expression. Um, that just those two things are so powerful. Those are pretty much the only things I do, directly to work on my happiness, and they are extremely powerful. Happiness is so easy.
Wow. Yeah, and what's interesting is that for me, it'll be, I'll be listening to music. There'll be some kind of music that I'll like dance to or just listen to while I'm doing other things, and it cheers me up. And it's really kind of interesting how that works. But with me, it's not so much words, like, because that doesn't mean as much to me. I'm actually not a verbal person. It's sort of something I've had to learn how to overcome in order to do podcasts and work at my job. But for me, just listening to some kind of instrumental music or just focusing on the instrumental part of a song and ignoring the lyrics often works. And I have all sorts of video game tunes through my head, and it makes me happy, and that's what I like about it. So there's something about music that can make somebody happy too.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And music, I mean, it just like that's why it's so popular. It's like, something about it. Just I don't know the physiology, the neurophysiology of it, but it just makes us feel good. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and what's great is that especially if you're a person who does live in these modern times and you've got an MP3 player of some type and anybody who's got a computer, yeah, music is so easy to find that you can find just about anything, and so that's very helpful too. So what we've got to do is we've got to find a way to make people happy because that will actually solve the violence problem more so than just focusing on the negative aspects.
Chandler, making people, I mean, like, I talk with Nick about this all the time because we constantly especially on the Manhattan show, we say, like, this is the biggest thing ever, the biggest revolution in human thought, the Searle quote and all. But then we have to acknowledge if somebody figures out a way to make this, to get people to become much happier, that will solve so many problems. I mean, and like once that's done, like that's it. I mean, if people, like, the average level of happiness here in the United States is about 70%. If people were like, the vast majority of people were like, let's say 95% happy or happier, imagine the kind of world we live in. Imagine the kinds of problems that we have now that we would no longer have because people wouldn't be doing, for example, like people overeat to try to become happier. People drink too much and do, too much drugs to become happier. People like just do a lot of immoral behavior to become happier. If people were happier, people would be so much better behaved, and that would eliminate so many problems.
Yeah, and this is very important. I mean, so yeah, I mean, I think happiness is kind of the big focus. Now, I do think that obviously, like we mentioned earlier in this episode, when you stop believing in free will and you understand, our causal will and all that, that does help you become happier because you've just eliminated the blame, the guilt, the shame, the revenge, and all those negative aspects. So that's definitely a first step. But then what do you think, like, once, like, say everybody gets that, what do you think is the most effective way that we can increase happiness worldwide?
Well, I mean, like, I think if the pharmaceuticals would pump, several billion dollars into the research, I think you know, a pill, a happiness pill, would probably be the easiest way. Again, they would have to make it safe. They would have to pretty much make it as safe as vitamins, but that would be the most direct way. But like, aside from that, a more natural way, for example, something so simple. Let's say, we're taught generally to walk around with good posture, not to slump. We're taught to sit up in our chairs and stuff. And interestingly, there's experiments in psychology that demonstrate that that's an effective way to boost one's mood. When one's, standing up straight, you feel better. Now, if to that posture we would add just one more element, that if people went around with a pleasant, not a wide open mouth, teeth bared, kind of like a smile, but a pleasant smile, kind of like maybe like a Mona Lisa smile or a bit stronger. If people walked around with that kind of expression, I guarantee, the world would be so much happier just for that. But aside from that, Aristotle said happiness is the highest good. It's the only end in life, and everything else is a means. So, like, the thing is, happiness is a skill. Whether it's smiling, whether it's like listening to tapes, or listening to music, or meditating, you know, the, the, the if people would just recognize that happiness is a skill that they can get much, much better at, and the whole world could get better at if we work together, then yeah, I think that would be the most powerful and simple, natural way to make this world just completely blissful. Really, I'm not sure there's that much of a limit to how happy we'd become if we'd just work on it.
Yeah, this is powerful because it does seem, I mean, depression is enough to kill. When people get very, very unhappy, that's enough for them to feel like life is worthless and then they kill themselves. And so this is serious. I mean, this is something that we really need to focus on more. Like, Jamie, what do you think?
Could you repeat that, please?
Oh yeah, we were talking about, how happier people, they're going to feel like life is worth living more. When people are really unhappy, they're depressed, and then they kill themselves. So this is a matter of life or death.
Of course it is. If you're pro-life and you believe all life is sacred, then you'll want to do anything to combat things that make people unhappy.
Yeah. And so this is the big challenge because, like, I want people to be happy. I don't want it to be like an ignorant happy, like, the ignorance is bliss thing. Let's not ever acknowledge that there's problems in the world. But there's got to be a way for us to say that, yes, there's problems in the world, but there's a way for us to be happy anyway. And we can that will actually help us to reduce the suffering in the world.
Yeah, what most people don't realize is happiness is like energy. The happier one is, the more able one is generally to to look at the problems in their lives and to take steps toward resolving them. To really, when a person's happy, or the person will just like want to do more. Like a lot of times, like yeah, like for example, like I will wait until I'm in a really good mood to, let's say, straighten up my apartment, right? Because like, then I do it and it feels really great and all. So the happier we become, the less onerous, less burdensome the work we have to do becomes. And it's like people would be happy not just when they're at home and with friends and stuff and family. People could be really happy while they're working, every single day.
Yeah, that's a very important thing. Because I mean, and here's another thing to bring it back to the religion thing for a moment is now people, their entire motivation for their religion is to experience, bliss, or nirvana, paradise, heaven, whatever. They're trying to seek pleasure through their religion, but I don't think that's an effective method. I think it's more important for us to learn how to be happy now.
Well, that's one of the major problems. Religion has kind of like two problems related to that. One is too many religions say, well, suffer now and you'll be rewarded after you die in heaven. So you have a lot of martyrs going around, a lot of people suffering just to get into heaven, just unnecessarily suffering. And the other major problem with religion is that it's focused too exclusively on goodness without, enough cognizance of the realization that goodness is about happiness. In other words, you're told to be good, in religions, but you're not told that like it's by being good in this world before you die that you can become much happier. That like John Locke, a British philosopher, he defined goodness as that which creates happiness. So it's good to be moral because morality helps us all to become happier. But religion rarely, there may be some people like Joel Osteen, whatever, some people who get into that stuff. For the vast majority of clerics and of religions, they're just completely focused on the goodness and with very little regard for the happiness of people in this life.
Well, what's interesting is it seems like these religions and some of these people in them, they believe that goodness is something entirely separate from happiness.
I,
That's
that's a great point, Chandler. You want to expand on that? Absolutely.
Yeah, they seem to have this idea that there are certain things that are good to do, and they almost sometimes the way they act is that the more miserable you are, the more you're doing the right thing.
Oh yeah, because I think like in what's part of a lot of religions is like they don't necessarily agree with or accept John Locke's definition of goodness. They simply they leave it at, well, what God tells us to do, that's good, and what He tells us not to do, that's bad, and they leave it at that. So they completely miss the point of goodness.
Right, and I think that that can be, I find that to be problematic, that, divine command theory, because that's like, somebody can make that mistake, because somebody could do that with their parents or with some other authority figure or anybody. They could, if as soon as they set up some person's words as the standard of what's good or bad, well, then they could be told to do something like like I don't know, go and kill a bunch of people or go and torture a bunch of people and burn them, or you know what I mean. They could be told to do something that causes a lot of pain, but it would be defined as good just because somebody said it.
Yeah, like look like a lot of like Islamic terrorists. They were looking forward to 72 virgins when they died because like somewhere in the Quran it says that that doing whatever will grant them that.
And what do they
It's
want 72 virgins for anyway?
I hear
Yeah, that's weird. I never understood that. But here's the
you. It's
deal.
hard enough keeping one woman happy.
Well, it's weird, but it doesn't that show you that it is really pleasure that they're seeking to begin with?
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
because there's always the idea, and I don't know the Islamic side of it, but with the Christian side, people are told, well, heaven, there's no more tears in heaven. Everyone will be happy. There'll be no more pain. There'll be no more sickness. There'll be no more death. And so everyone will be happy. So it's about a place where there's no pain. It's about it all being all good. So here's the deal. Everything that somebody does, including those things which they believe God has commanded them to do, they may hate doing it, but it may cause them great pain, but it's always about because they believe it will give them more pleasure later on. So this shows that they're always following the hedonic imperative. Whatever they believe will give them the most pleasure.
Yeah, and Chandler, that's also a problem, in secular life. People postpone their happiness. People say to themselves, oh, yeah, when I get this advanced degree, I'll be happy. When I get married, I'll be happy. When I get that job, I'll be happy. When I get that promotion, when I retire, I'll be happy. Like, and no, happiness is sometimes, yes, sometimes you work hard and you arrive at your goal, let's say getting married or, some kind of job. And that, sometimes does lead to lasting happiness. But much more often than not, a lot of times people suffer unnecessarily, you know, during the years that it might take to achieve these goals. And then they find once they've achieved these goals, depending on the goal, but a lot of things we strive for, like for example, amassing a huge amount of money or something. People say, oh yeah, when I make all this money, I'm going to be really, really happy. According to the research, we've understood this for decades. No, basically like making that much more money is not going to make people happier. An advanced degree is not, a person's not going to be more happy with a PhD than they were with a bachelor's, I mean, like, so, but people don't understand this. That's why the science of happiness is so important, because like after 50, 60 years of research, they've begun to understand this stuff. And yeah, so like happiness, is something to be experienced moment by moment. It's not something you want to like ordinarily in general postpone to an indefinite future.
Yeah, because I think what happens is that if people are always postponing their happiness and thinking, well, I'll be happy, or when I have more money, or whatever, then they will keep postponing it, and then before you know it, they're dead, and they never were happy.
Absolutely. That happens when people like wait to retire to enjoy their lives. Yeah. They develop an early illness and it's over. I know.
Yeah, so why postpone something to some unknown time when it might just never happen then?
I hear you.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean this is very important, and it's kind of weird. And let's see now, so yeah, if people are happier in general, then it will perhaps it will decrease their reliance on drugs and alcohol. It will decrease their need for even food because like they won't be trying to eat more to be happier necessarily.
I once was talking to a med student at a coffee shop here, and like I asked this person, I asked her like, I kind of like speculate, like I asked her about what percent of illnesses uh, did she think was caused by people seeking happiness in ways that weren't healthy, like drinking too much and eating too much and so many other behaviors like that. And I think she said something like, well, about at least 50%. So think about that. Think about how much we would save in healthcare costs. Think about how much healthier everybody would be if they would stop, if they would become happier and no longer have to resort to these unhealthy, risky behaviors, to find their happiness in these, very unwise ways.
Yeah, and here's something else that I'm kind of wondering. Another thing that people do is, like, for example, they like scary things and they'll watch horror movies. And I've never understood this, but for some reason, a lot of people they get some kind of thrill out of that, some kind of chemical addiction to that. And I don't know how that works, but I was just kind of thinking about that recently because, today is Halloween and so many people are celebrating dead, scary things.
I know and it's like it's not just the horror films and stuff. It's also like the crime dramas on TV and all. People like just hurting each other, killing each other. Just um, Chandler, I'm with you there. I I don't understand. I'd like to actually, because I've had this question, on my mind for decades, and I'm wondering if somebody's written a good book on this that explains, why people could like. In my mind, for example, like I have a feeling a lot of people are paranoid. I have a feeling a lot of people live in fear of other people. Fear of being robbed, fear of being hurt and stuff. And I have a feeling those fears come from all this, horrible like drama that they watch of people hurting each other. I have a feeling people have no idea how harmful that stuff is.
Well, yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, that could be making people unhappy right there. And here's what's interesting about it is that I generally, I mean, I dislike violence. The most violence I've ever seen, was like in the documentary Earthlings, for example. Just seeing the violence done to these animals. But then, um, there'll be some kind of movie that ends up popular, such as the Hunger Games or the Passion of the Christ, which for some reason was one of the apparently it's a very was a very popular selling movie, but I'm not exactly sure why, because it was the bloodiest film of all time.
Yeah, well, actually, I walked out on the Passion of Christ because, like, after a while, I said, "What is this?" It was just like, oh, it was torturous. And then, like, I've heard that the Hunger Games is a great movie, but I refuse to see it because, like, the theme. I don't want to see people, killing each other for sport.
Yeah, it's really frustrating because, yeah, I mean, I can't really stand it. Um and so, yeah, and so I wonder, cuz I mean, yeah, I would like to understand, genuinely would like to understand why people they want to watch violent things. Um because it's not pleasant. And that could be a major source of unhappiness there, is it getting them all depressed, because I think that causes nightmares.
I wouldn't doubt it. Recently, I got curious and I downloaded a Kindle book on Schadenfreude. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right, but it's basically the idea of people like taking pleasure at the pain of other people. When I guess, and that maybe explains these crime dramas and these horror things. So when somebody sees somebody else having it much worse than them, really, suffering for some sick reason, because it really is sick, it makes them feel better.
That seems weird to me. I guess there are some people that get pleasure out of that. For example, people who laugh, like there was an episode of America's Funniest Home Videos my mom and I saw on TV years ago. And whenever there was some video of some guy getting hurt in the balls, then the audience laughed like it was funny. And I'm like, what's so funny about somebody being hurt?
I know, and then you got to wonder because this isn't natural to human beings. Like infants and toddlers don't naturally develop to enjoy when other infants and exactly as a matter of fact it's exact opposite. Toddlers are naturally empathic. They basically when another toddler is hurting, they will feel bad. So like this sick pleasure at other people's pain, this is something that's part of our world culture. It's not just here in the United States or the rich countries. I think it's probably throughout a lot of the world. And I'm wondering if somebody kind of like, has studied that and published on that. What explains it? Why, how did that develop?
What you think maybe is that it's something we have to be taught because we're not born that way.
I think so. I think so. I don't know how popular fairy tales are, like Grimm's fairy tales, where just a lot of like unkind things happen. Like Little Riding Hood. Like Hansel and Gretel, kids being put in an oven, all that stuff, whatever. I mean, like this is like sick stuff.
Yeah.
This is, you know, and you read these stories to very little kids. I don't get it.
Yeah, I never understood that kind of thing either. And see, here's what's weird, as is for me, the most gruesome things I grew up hearing were the animal sacrifices in the Bible, and the flood of Genesis 6, and those stories. My mom used to read those Bible stories to me, and I mean that traumatized me, these awful stories of all this suffering. And so that was basically the sort of fairy tales that I was exposed to, and which is why I have such an antipathy towards it now, you might say.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes, like those of us who are unfortunately more intelligent, we're more sensitive to this stuff. We more naturally understand how wrong it is, how immoral it is.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, It's weird. I mean, of course, and as we know, we don't have a free will. Everything that we think, comes from something in our past, either experience or there's some way, for some reason, your favorite color is blue and you just can't stop it being blue. That was Felicia Hogan's problem.
Yeah, and again, so like, and this, see, here's the thing. This is another reason why the free will topic is so important to the world. As long as we continue to believe in free will, we will continue to believe that we human beings are the source of our problems. So like, if we're looking to human beings as the source of our problems, when the problem, in a certain sense lies outside of us, that may be preventing us from finding more fundamental truths. I mean,
Yeah,
certainly, yeah, certainly we have to address, like, like human happiness. I mean, but yeah, there's like, for example, if we're not responsible for the evil in the world, what is? I mean, like, for this whole everything, it just like, you know, the free will belief has us look for answers to things with human beings, in human beings, where the answer, has to lie elsewhere.
yeah, and here's what's interesting is that basically, well, here's what's very bizarre about it, George. Now, what you'll notice is that theists and atheists, for the most part, both have this problem, because both groups have such strong free will belief in the majority of them. So here's what's weird is now from the secular side, people think, oh, humans are have free will. So many of them still believe that. And so they think, well, whenever humans are having a bad life, there are some humans who are to blame, either the person themselves or other people. But then here's what's really weird is from the religious side of things, they still placed all the blame on humans instead of, but they never blame God, which is weird because supposedly everything that happens is God's will if God's all powerful really and can do anything like they claim. That's their claim anyway.
I know, that's you're right. That's exactly it. In other words, like the free will belief, like, and it's weird. We've talked about this before. It's contradictory because when something good happens, they'll say, well, that's, God did that. Or if we do something good, it's not us. God allowed us to do it, or God enabled us to do it. But you're right. I mean, like when we do bad, it's always us instead of God.
Well,
It
yeah,
just
and
may.
I have noticed like that. I Nick Vale calls that free will flip-flopping, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea, and here's what's weird about it. Like, yeah, this idea, well, and just like people, of course, theists do that with God, but then humans do that with other humans all the time. They say that, but they do it kind of in a reverse thing. Whenever I do something good, it's because I chose to do good because I'm great. But when somebody else does something bad, well, um, it's or even if the person themselves does bad, then it's still somebody else's fault that they did bad. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So they do their own free will flip flopping there, but it's still a weird thing because they're trying to say, well, this thing here is all good. They're either declaring that God is all good, or they are declaring that themselves that they're all good. Therefore, anything that goes wrong in their lives is some other human's fault. So here's what's weird about it is that we've got a problem because now there seems to a lot of people they notice there's a conflict and so they say, well, stop blaming other people and take responsibility for your own actions and your choices because you're to credit and to blame. But that requires a free will belief, because the truth is that we're not really to blame and neither are any of the other humans either. And a lot of people have a really hard time with that idea that no one is truly to blame.
I know, and just I mean, like, imagine a world without blame. Where no one again can logically, rationally blame anyone else or themselves for anything. I mean, that's got to be a very, very pleasant world. Because think of like, like when little kids do something wrong, as little kids always do, because they don't know any better, because various reasons. They get blamed and they get punished and they get hurt and stuff. And I think at a certain level, maybe little kids just get it. They really object to being punished because they don't understand. I think in a certain sense, they get that what they do isn't up to them. That they get that they didn't know any better. Stuff like that.
Yeah, and I do find that weird, and this is kind of another controversial thing, but I actually don't believe in spanking. Like, I don't really think that that's a good thing. Um, because it seems like all that does is it teaches the kid, well, if I do certain things or say certain things or whatever, well, then my parent is going to hurt me. That seems to be what the message it sends, but it doesn't actually teach them anything. It may modify their behavior, but at a certain point, they're going to grow up, they're going to become an adult, and then their idea is, well, as long as nobody is hurting me for something, I must be doing the right thing.
No, you're right. That's why I'm really interested to, we should do a podcast soon with Mitch kind of presenting in much more detail his idea of a world without punishment. Because, when he first presented it to me, I kind of like I couldn't get it at all. I couldn't see how, like, especially with very young kids, that would work. But the more I think about it, the more I think, yeah, I think that, not only will it work, but, like, 50, 100 years from now, that's the way the world will be.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea for a future episode. And I think Mitch will like doing that. So yeah, because I mean, this episode was great because I mean, we talked a lot about happiness. Actually, that wasn't what how I planned it, of course. But we were, but we've come to the conclusion, sort of, that happier people do less harmful things.
Yeah, we should probably talk about happiness much more because, as we were talking about before, the more we get it, the happier we'll be, and the happier the world is, the fewer problems we have. The much better everything is.
Yeah, and that's good because for too long I've felt like that I can't be happy until all the problems in the world are solved. And
Oh, I know, I know. I went through decades like that. I hear you.
yeah, and I don't want to waste decades of my life being unhappy while I'm waiting for the whole world to go vegan, you know?
Yeah, there's an expression that the perfect is the enemy of the good. To the extent that we kind of like bemoan and, like, certainly animal abuse. There's a lot of wrongs in the world that we should be, working to end. But what we need to keep in mind is that we can work on them. Not only can we work on them, but we could probably succeed and further our efforts much more by maintaining our happiness than by becoming sad and then just like losing our energy and our willpower. Happiness is an energy. We want to do good in the world. Happiness is the way to do it.
Yeah, I think that's good. So let's see. I think that's a good place to end this episode. Um, You've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion with Chandler Klebs, George Ortega, and Jamie Soden. And we talked a lot about happiness, and we talked about, the hedonic imperative, how people seek pleasure and avoid pain, and, happiness being the highest good, and how this could be a way where we can reduce the problems in the world by increasing people's happiness. So we'll be exploring this and other topics in future episodes. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.